back to the John Fredericks Radio Show. This is Mike Rubino guest hosting for the Godzilla the Truth. And joining us shortly, we have Gordan Chang, who is the preeminent expert on China. Mr. Chang is joining us now live. Thank you so much for joining us here on the John Fredericks Radio Show.
Thank you so much.
So I want to just dive right in. I saw your hit on Tucker this week. I think most of Virginia would love to hear what you have to say about a wide variety of topics. But first, just start us off. Tell us about yourself. Tell all of Virginia who you are, and then I have just a slew of questions for you.
Okay. I'm Gordan Chang. I'm a writer, and I talk about North Korea and China, East Asia. And, of course, this area in the world right now is creating much too much news, especially with the coronavirus epidemic that is radiating out from China, and which in a real sense is impacting the rest of the world as well, including the U.S. Mm-hmm. We have seen, of course, stock market drops here, but also people talking about infections, and we now have about 29 infections in the U.S.
Well, diving into the coronavirus, a couple of different stories have popped out to me as I was doing my news clippings this morning. Iran announced 13 new cases of the coronavirus and 2 new deaths, and Iran's health ministry announced, this very recently. Then we have the New York Times publishing an article about Senator Tom Cotton, who I'm a big fan of, who's essentially, repeating this theory about the origins of the coronavirus, which would lead me to believe that it could be a bioweapon or something of some kind like that. I'm just curious what you think about the origins of the coronavirus. It's made in a highly secure lab, biochemical lab in Wuhan. Do you think Senator Cotton's onto something? What do you think? What do you make of Iran having new contract cases? Do you think that this is going to be a global pandemic? Break it down for us.
We don't know the origins of the coronavirus, and Beijing has done a pretty good job in preventing the rest of the world from investigating this. Mm-hmm. There is a World Health Organization team in China, but they're being kept away from the source of the contagion, which is Wuhan in Hubei province. What Senator Cotton has said is that there's a possibility that this could have come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is a P4 level, highest level biosafety lab. People said that the senator said it came from the lab. No, that's not what the senator said. The senator said we've got to keep all of the options on the table because escape from this facility is one of the possibilities. And he's absolutely right about that. The Lancet, which is the authoritative British journal, medical journal, on January 24th, issued an article which said that many of the initial cases did not come from the wet market that most people believe is the source of this disease. And if not all the cases came from that wet market, they must have come from someplace else. We need a lot more investigation before we can say anything, even on a preliminary basis.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's just such a prevalent thing in the news. I think the New York Times, failing New York Times as Donald Trump would call it, even has the bottom of their world news page has just stories exclusively about the coronavirus. But hopscotching from the coronavirus to trade, phase 1 of the China deal's done. What do you make of that? And then what do you make of phase 2? Obviously, I read an article yesterday about how China's push for 5G is being significantly slowed down because of the coronavirus outbreak. We have, essentially people quarantined in China. Their manufacturing output is significantly delayed. What do you make of all of that, the global market implications of the coronavirus, and then pivoting that and melding it into the U.S.-China trade conflict?
Well, phase 1 of the deal, which was signed on January 15th, may or may not be implemented. At the heart of the deal for the purposes of the United States is a commitment by China to buy an extra $200 billion worth of U.S. goods over a 2-year period compared to the 2017 baseline. And right now, China is not in a position really to buy very much, largely because the shipping companies are bypassing China because they're concerned about a number of things, especially coronavirus. Um, Phase 2, I don't think will ever get done, largely because the difficult issues were delayed and deferred to the Phase 2 discussions. These are issues about China's subsidies of its enterprises. These are the things that Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, believes in, and he won't give up. So I don't see that there's going to be a real Phase 2 deal, especially not in the near future.
Well, you have the President of the United States dead set on, keeping Huawei and its components out of our networks, which I think is also a major impediment. A national security threat, honestly. I've heard horror stories from my friends in the government that have explained that their components are essentially government assets. I think there's a number of stumbling blocks, but you're correct. Phase 1 was a big deal, but it seems like Phase 2 is going to be much more tricky.
Yes. On Huawei and 5G, the President is absolutely correct. Huawei is a threat to the United States and to the world. Huawei says it's a Chinese employee-owned enterprise, but actually Beijing controls 99% of the ownership interest through what is called a union, but which is really a placeholder for the Chinese state and the Communist Party. Huawei hasn't told the truth to the United States. We know that it has inappropriately, in other words, criminally stolen U.S. technology. It's under investigation now for doing that. It's also under indictment for violating U.S. sanctions on Iran. Huawei is a bad actor, and the president should do everything possible to put it out of business.
Well, and I think he's doing that. I mean, there are, U.S. implications as far as our ability to grow into smaller, more rural markets just because their components are pervasive in the marketplace. I mean, everyone uses them, which is unfortunate. But I think that this is one of those principled stands that the President of the United States is making that's so well informed, and it's so much for the betterment of the people. And even though it's making things more complicated, I don't think people really fully understand China has such a deep reach into our world because not only are they everywhere. I've traveled the globe and I've seen what they do. They come in and they build ports, they build mining facilities, and they do it all on the cheap. Everything that they do it so that they can be everywhere at one time, but they don't necessarily do it to last. They just do it to be there. And that's the same with Huawei. They want to be everywhere at one time. And the world can't, that's not sustainable.
No, it's not. Huawei offers equipment with discounts up to 40% from those of its two competitors, which are Ericsson and Nokia. And it's able to do that because of large, massive state subsidies from the Chinese central government. And clearly this is predatory trading. The reason why China does it because it uses Huawei equipment to steal data.
Yep.
And also with 5G, which is the fifth generation of wireless networks, 5G's networks are now being installed. It will be able to manipulate the devices of the future. So, for instance, your front door, your car, your pacemaker will be controlled to the Internet of Things through 5G, and China will be able to manipulate them, which means it'll be able to unlock your front door, drive your car off a cliff, or turn off or speed up your pacemaker. So this is something that is critical to the United States right now.
I fear that your message is so important. That's why I called to have you on, because I don't think that people realize how existential this threat is. Our last guest, Eric Bovin, he's also very well traveled. He was explaining just how existential the threat of China is. I want to pivot to something that's more intelligence-based. So there's something called the Five Eyes Group, which is England, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and the United States, which shares intelligence. And I've heard you speak on the Five Eyes Group a number of times. I'd love for you to inform our listeners just exactly what, inform them about Five Eyes and your take.
Well, Five Eyes is an intelligence sharing consortium, and these are our closest allies. And the reason why Five Eyes is now being discussed is because Britain and Canada very well may be putting Huawei 5G equipment into their telecom networks. The United States has said that we will reduce intelligence sharing with any country that has 5G in their networks. And Britain, about 2 weeks ago, announced that it is giving the green light to purchase Huawei 5G equipment for what is called the non-core elements of their networks. That distinction, core and non-core, really is meaningless.
Well, the President of the United States lost his mind on Boris Johnson over that.
And
Apoplectic.
President Trump should have done that.
Yes.
Because Boris Johnson should have said no Huawei for Britain. This is going to cause a rupture in the relationship. This is exactly what China wants. But the U.S. really has no choice right now in terms of what we do with the Five Eyes. And many people have started talking about this as being the Three Eyes. In other words, Canada and Britain being sawed off. Canada has not yet made a 5G decision, but all indications are is that it will allow Huawei equipment into its network. And that is going to be a major setback for the United States.
Now, because you're a global expert, especially in the region, the Chinese region, but then including North Korea, I'd like to also talk about President Rodrigo Duterte. News reports came out a couple weeks ago that he was essentially not backing the President of the United States for re-election, which was, I thought, an odd news report. And then a news report came out within the last 5 to 7 days that said he was backing the President for re-election, which, again, I find odd. But the Philippines as a whole is a rather interesting country. They have al-Qaeda elements in some of their more hidden islands. They have massive infrastructure problems. And then they have China dumping billions of dollars into them. And I think that they're becoming largely beholden to China. So I'd love to get your take on both the Philippines, and then if we can, because we still have 7 minutes, I'd like to talk about North Korea.
Well, the Philippines has given notice to the United States that it is canceling its visiting forces agreement, and that is going to be a major rupture in relations between Manila and Washington, because without an agreement that covers American troops in the Philippines, we won't be able to operate in that country, and we may not be able to really stay there. Philippines is a treaty partner of the United States, but Duterte is very anti-American. He has been since he's a teenager, and he's very pro-China.
Yep.
The thing that's odd about this is that the United States protects the Philippines from China because China has claims to many of the Philippine islands. And the Philippines is an archipelago, so it is nothing but a collection of islands.
Correct.
So Beijing is trying to dismember the Philippines. But nonetheless, Duterte is moving towards them. Duterte's move is not entirely his fault. The U.S. commitment to the Philippines wavered during the Obama administration. And so Duterte does have an argument that we haven't defended him. But nonetheless, his actions are unjustified. But we need to have a more robust policy towards Manila if we are expecting the Philippine president to support our positions. And with regard to North Korea, nothing very much is happening right now except that the North Koreans are continuing to build missiles and develop their arsenal of nuclear weapons while they refuse to discuss these in good faith with the United States. So this is not a success story for the president because right now the North Koreans are doing exactly what we don't want them to do, which is to build up their arsenals.
Well, I think that's a very interesting point because the president did, unprecedented things. He stepped into North Korea. He met with Kim Jong-un. Now, Kim Jong-un has also got on that long bullet train of his. I don't even know if it's not a bullet train because it's very slow moving, but essentially an armored tank of a train. And he went to meet with Xi Jinping. Is there a state of play that most Americans are unaware of where North Korea is trying to cozy up further to China to spite President Trump? I mean, what exactly is the detailed, in-the-weeds nature of North Korea at the moment in their geopolitical, state of play with China, Russia, and then obviously the United States?
Well, China has effectively supported North Korea for decades now, especially after the end of the Cold War. And this was demonstrated when Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, went to Chinese soil 4 straight times before Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, returned a visit to Pyongyang. We, at this particular time, have to understand that China is the problem. It's not necessarily North Korea. And it's going to be very important for us to try to break that relationship. President Trump is giving the North Korean ruler a time to do the right thing, but the North Korean ruler is not taking up the president's invitation. So at some point, President Trump will have to pivot. He will have to go back to a more robust policy on North Korea, and I'm pretty sure that he will because right now our North Korea policy, the North Koreans are not reciprocating the gestures of friendship from
No,
President
they're not.
Trump.
Well, we have about 2 minutes left, so first I want to tell all of our listeners, go out and buy Gordan's book, The Coming Collapse of China. It's probably one of the best reads I've ever read on China. It discusses the non-performing loans of the big 4 Chinese state banks and how this entire Chinese financial system and its government is likely to collapse. Gordan, you have 2 minutes. Talk about whatever you want to, plug whatever you want to. Thank you so much for joining us here on the John Fredericks Radio Show.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. The most important point for all of us Americans is to understand the direct challenge that China has posed to the U.S. It's a tech competitor, it's a geopolitical competitor, it's an economic competitor, and China is using the most hostile and belligerent means against the United States. So we've got to be concerned over there. What I try to do to update the book, and thank you very much for your kind words, is I tweet on my Twitter handle, which is Gordan G. Chang, Gordongchang, where I just update things on a minute-by-minute basis. Because right now, things are changing so fast, it's very hard to keep up for anybody.
Well, my girlfriend, I'm actually going to make sure that she follows you because she constantly updates me on the coronavirus. She's always sucking up news on the coronavirus because it is a terrifying concept, this novel coronavirus and how it's slowly making its way across the globe. And China's doing everything in their God-given power to hide it from, they're not letting WHO in. Now, I think the WHO should be defunded, but that's just me personally.
You're right about that, by the way. It should be defunded because it's actually causing, on balance, more harm than good for a lot of reasons.
Well, I completely agree, and that's, speaks to your earlier point about Five Eyes as well. Five Eyes is a great concept, but not if everyone's, if they're not singing from the same song sheet, what is the point, right? Huawei and China, they're out to get us. They have no desire to see a successful United States of America. I doubt that they want to see a successful Canada, England, Australia, or New Zealand either. So the global threat of China, the existential threat of China is not just financial, it's not just infrastructure, it's not just, their ability to manipulate markets and to buy up debt. They now have a massive virus coming out of their country going to parts unknown. I mean, this is a terrifying state of the world, the world as a whole.
Oh, you're absolutely right about that, because we have other countries now that are starting to end up with epidemics, such as South Korea, and of course Japan. So there's very little that we can do if China doesn't cooperate, and China is not cooperating. They're hiding, as you say, and that means there's really no solution to this, except other countries will suffer.
Well, Gordan, thank you so much for joining us. Please make sure that you go follow Gordan on Twitter, Gordan B. Chang. Gordan, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. G. Chang.
Thank you.